Good morning. This is the content you'll need to know to pass the middle school or junior high shop safety exam. As we begin to prepare for our woodworking projects, the first thing you need to know is that when we're working in the shop, there are really three things that are non-negotiable. The first is that every member of the class must be wearing safety glasses at all times. Because there are multiple people working at the same time, even if you are not doing something that you feel is dangerous, other people around you may have things going on that could potentially cause danger to your eyes. So if anyone is working in the shop, everyone should be wearing safety glasses. The safety glasses that we use inside one of the earpieces should say something like Z287.1 plus. That is a rating by OSHA that tells us what the plastic will do when an item hits it. And we're looking for plastic of the rating that will, when it shatters, stay put together and keep items out of your eyes rather than shattering inward. So it's not like just any old sunglasses will work. We want safety glasses that are of the appropriate rating. The second of the non-negotiable items is appropriate clothing and footwear. And I've given you some examples here on the slide. I would ask that this entire slide be in your notes. When we are working in the shop, your legs need to be covered. So if you are coming from PE or going to basketball practice next, for the duration of this unit, you'll need to make sure you have some jeans with you can change into. You need to have footwear that covers your entire foot and protects it. So that kind of takes flip-flops or slippers off the table. We want something that protects the top of your foot in case something is dropped on it, particularly something sharp or pointed that could injure the top of your foot. If you have long hair, it needs to be tied back and all jewelry needs to be removed for this unit. When we're looking at jewelry, we note that we want necklaces taken off because they're at a risk of getting caught in turning tools. We're looking at rings being taken off of hands so that if your hand is smashed, the metal doesn't cut into it. Most very small earrings are just fine, but if you have big hoop earrings, there's also a risk there of them getting caught. Our goal with all of these guidelines is actually just to keep you safe. Some people feel like they're rather confining, but they all have come to be on this list because people have gotten them caught in tools or injured themselves at different times. I try to keep hair ties on hand. However, they sometimes don't last long. So ladies or gentlemen with long hair, if you would try to keep a hair tie in your pocket, we need your hair tied back so that it doesn't get caught in a turning tool and get ripped out of your head. The third non-negotiable item is permission to work in the shop. As we've talked about in this class before, we need someone leading the class who is trained in shop safety and who meets the requirements of the school liability guidelines. And so that means that it's not like every substitute is trained or even that school administrators are trained in how to keep kids safe in a shop. For the most part, you don't work on the woodworking projects unless I am here with you as your instructor. There are a few exceptions, and I will make you aware of those as they happen. Let's take just a few minutes to go through some of the tools that you'll be using on this project. The first of which is a handsaw. Handsaws are relatively safe, but it is worth noting that the blades, if it's newer, are very sharp. And so you want to keep your hands off the blade area. We've demonstrated how to use a handsaw in class, but the handsaws we have, you cut on the push and the pull. We talked briefly when we demonstrated in class that you will do best if you focus on friction, not pressure. So a handsaw's cutting mechanism is the friction of it moving all the way down the blade. And so it doesn't help you at all to push harder. Instead, a light touch and moving the blade all the way across the cut works well. When you begin, you may want to go slow so that you can make sure the cut is on the line. I like to drag it towards me for the first time to make a little groove for the saw to fit in, and then continue going back and forth to have a nice straight cut. The second tool that I want to make you aware of is the miter box saw. This is one of the power tools you'll be using in this unit. At the junior high level, you only use a power tool such as this when I'm standing there. So we kind of use this as a transition into high school where you'll be using primarily all power tools. Each person in the class will have the opportunity to cut a couple times on this miter saw, and we will continue to demonstrate it multiple times in class. A power tool is basically the same function as a hand tool, but motorized, and it enables us to do things with a more efficient cut, typically a more straight cut, and oftentimes much quicker. It also brings with it more danger. So particularly on our DeWalt miter box saw at the back of the shop, you're going to want to make sure you take note of the safety lines and keep your hands outside them. You will keep the piece of wood pushed against the fence and the table. The fence is the part of the that stands upright, and then the table sits flat. And that, in conjunction with the blade spinning down, will help hold the lumber in place in a safe way. Once the lumber is set and lined up, you'll push the button in and bring it at a moderate speed through the lumber. You actually hold the blade into the bottom of the saw and then release the trigger while holding it there. That means that the blade is down inside the saw while it stops, and it prevents opportunity for you to accidentally nick your hand while the blade is slowing down to a stop. The miter box saw makes really wonderful, nice straight cuts. It keeps them perpendicular if the fence and the table are set correctly. And so it's probably one of the most flexible and useful pieces of equipment on a construction site. Next is the drill and the drill press. The drill press, and all drills really, are turning tools. This means that the safety piece of information there is you don't want to get anything caught in a turning tool. It typically continues spinning and can suck the person or the appendage down into it and cause some harm. We also want to be careful when we're using drill bits in a handheld drill setup, that we drill straight in and straight out so that we aren't breaking the equipment. And we talked a little bit in class about how when you use a screwdriver bit in that electric drill handpiece, if you will, that you make sure you apply lots of downward pressure and a slow turning at first so that you don't strip out the screwdriver bit. In terms of safety, the big things you have to worry about is that your piece of wood is secured in place, either with clamps or people helping you hold it, and that you keep everything out of the drilling or turning radius. Now, in terms of actually trying it, we'll deal with this tool on a more hands-on basis because there are some hints and tips that I can show you that are really hard to describe and put on paper. So we can settle for just having these parts in your notes. The next tool we want to add to our notes is the jigsaw. The jigsaw is a very portable power tool. Its main purpose is to cut curves, and depending on the width of the blade, you can sometimes actually cut curves that are very tight or large swooping curves. Our jigsaws have adjustable speeds, meaning the harder you push in the trigger, the faster the blade moves up and down. That is beneficial because then you can choose the appropriate speed. Jigsaws are quick and easy to use. They have kind of a flat a table piece, if you will, that you set and keep flat on your lumber. You're typically trying to follow a line. And so if you look on that flat guide piece, you'll see a pointed area that you usually line up with the line so that the saw cuts your line. When we work on a hands-on basis, we'll talk about how with a jigsaw, you cut your outside curves before your inside curves. We'll talk about how sometimes you have to cut out the excess lumber to make this work. But you will find a jigsaw to be very useful in projects that have shapes in them. Next, let's talk about the power sander. A power sander does the same function as hand sanding. It has a piece of sandpaper, but in a power sander, it's attached in ours to a vibrating plane or flat piece. We also have belt sanders, and belt sanders are a little different because the sandpaper is glued into a circle. In either case, you sand with the grain. Now, in a woodworking project, the grain is, if you will, the lines in the wood. It actually is indicative of how the tree grew that the lumber was harvested from. But we always want to go with those lines. And that's because a sander makes tiny, minute lines of its own. And so if we have them running in the same way, we find that the project looks more finished. You keep the sandpaper moving at all times. If you hold it in one spot too long, sometimes it makes a divot. And we want to be really responsible about the amount of sandpaper we use. Sandpaper is actually paper with a certain grit glued to it with a special adhesive. It's expensive, and so we want to make sure that we are using it all the way up and not being wasteful. In terms of safety, sanders are relatively safe. We do want to make sure that you keep skin off of the sanding plane at all times, but particularly while it's moving, because it will skin your sand. It will sand your skin off just the same as it will sand a piece of lumber. In addition, anytime you use a sander, when you turn it on and use it, when you turn it off, you never set it down on the table until it's absolutely still again. That's very important to the safety of the machine and the user. Here is a list of some of the tools you'll be using on this project. As we talked about, you'll be using a handsaw. We'll practice using a square so you can draw straight lines. We're going to do some measuring, and you'll actually spend some of the class period today practice measuring. You'll have the opportunity to use a miter box saw, sander, and drills. And in some situations, you'll watch or observe use of the table saw. We may also occasionally use other power tools with my help. I'm looking forward to a fun project. Please make sure that you have taken good notes on these and studied these notes, as our next step is to pass a safety test with 100%. So we will begin taking the first drafts of that test on Thursday, and we'll retake it as many times as needed until you are competent with this information. There are a few principles of action that we want to make sure you pay attention to when you are using tools and working on woodworking. The first is that you always use the right tool for the job. For example, if you need to hammer a nail in and you don't see a hammer near you, it is not appropriate for you to grab a wrench and try and get that done. We have a great selection of tools. It's worth your time to go get the correct one. When you are using a tool, I want you to pay attention to where it's about to cut and focus in on making sure that area is clean. Make sure there's no nails or staples. Make sure the table is not in that area under the wood so that we respect the tools and have a good project. At the end of every class period, we'll put all the tools away and clean the shop. It is tricky to have, 20 of us or more working on projects all at the same time. So it will be important that you label all parts of your project with your name. You typically write that kind of on the edge of the lumber. And when you go to use a piece of lumber, you certainly don't use someone else's pieces. Obviously, when we're cutting, we keep all our fingers away from the blades of saws. And when we have to clamp a piece down, we do that securely so that it doesn't fly across the room. Okay, continue to study. We will plan to take the test soon. Have a good day.